Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our 8th virtual bike workshop today. My name is Cassidy Drasser, and I'm joined with the rest of the Commuter Choice team, Ben Hammer and Mass Bike's Galen Mook. I would like to make a few announcements before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our website. I ask that everyone stay muted so we can hear our speaker, Galen. You have the ability to turn your camera on or off, and it's up to you. When I'm done sharing my screen and Galen starts, you will most likely want to be on speaker mode so you can watch the demo on a full screen. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. We have been answering questions as they come in, and Galen will check in a few times to answer any outstanding chat questions. We would like to hear where you enjoy bike riding in Massachusetts, so please share in the chat, and we can share all ideas and potentially explore them later on this spring. Our next workshop is on May 26th and will be about new bike infrastructure that has been installed in Harvard Square during the pandemic. As a reminder, you can view any previous workshop recordings on our website. I will also plug current and upcoming bike challenges. As you may be aware, Bike Month has been postponed to September again. However, Mass Bike is running monthly challenges leading up to September. We're currently in 30 days of biking. And next month will be bike to work, bike to school, bike before your first Zoom. And you can log your trips on the Love to Ride platform. I'm happy to introduce our speaker for today, Galen. Galen Mook is the Executive Director of Mass Bike. You may recognize Galen from past workshops and tune-ups on campus. So Galen, you can take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you, Ben. And thanks everyone from the Harvard team. I'm actually going to go to speaker mode myself. So up at the top at view, at the top right, if you hit the speaker button, and let's see, I think we should be good. Cool. So yeah, my name is Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Bike. We do statewide bike advocacy, which means we operate on kind of a 35,000-foot view of how policies and legislation and general cultural shift from the top down work. But I've been a bike advocate in the neighborhood of Alston for the past better part of 12 years or so. So I particularly enjoy helping individuals ride, teaching people how to pump up their own tires, check their brakes, check their bike, and ride safely out on the road. So though we deal on the bigger scale, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to operate on a level that makes sense for you and your bike, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. Yeah, a couple of house cleaning stuff too. Actually, Cassidy, am I on the pinned view or the, I'm just seeing myself for the most part. I wonder if I could just pin myself. I've pinned myself. I don't know if that works for everybody. Maybe it's just for my own benefit. But if there's any technical snafus out there, please chime in the chat. If you can't hear, if you can't see, if my internet goes out or something, Cassidy and Ben are here as backup. And of course, use the chat for any questions. I want to be able to make sure that this makes sense for you. But today's talk is going to be mainly about the bike itself. We'll talk about my bike here and maybe how it's different or similar to your bike, but we're going to be covering essentially the universals of how all bikes typically need to be checked up and cleaned up. And we've done an ABC webinar, an air brakes chain webinar, which is a full 90 minutes with Commuter Choice in the past. We've done safe riding routes. We've done intro to commuting, how to commute in wet weather and in the winter time as well. So there's lots of resources that we could cover today. But that said, I'm trying to gear this a little bit towards, hey, it's springtime, it's beautiful out. You're probably going to pull your bike out after a couple of months of not riding. What do you need to check on your bike to make sure it's safe to ride and ready to roll? I've invited you to my bike room, which is my laundry room in my basement, which I like to have as my webinar rooms because I'm limited in what I can do here. I'm not at a bike shop. I'm confined to a little bit of an enclosed space because I'm imagining that's where you will be operating some of your mechanical needs and cleanups and all of that. So I'm intentionally putting myself here, even though out my window, it is a gorgeous day outside. So I encourage you, if you are able to take this webinar and lunchtime outdoors, please do. But if you're also able to grab your bike and follow along, there might be some things that you want to pay attention to similarly or different to your bike to my bike, so that if there are any specific questions you might have, when we get to the end, I'll try to leave some space for Q&A. There might be an opportunity to turn your video on and show me your bike, and then I could guide you through a little bit of nuances, because I will probably repeat this over and over again this hour, but there are a million different types of bikes and styles of brakes, of tires, of shocks, of forks, etc. So there's not going to be a one-to-one relationship of what my bike will do for what your bike will do. But again, I'm going to try to cover a very basic, broad brush stroke of just how to check your bike, what to look for when you're out there. And, you know, again, this is geared towards the very, very basic. And I'll probably say this several times today too. If there's any concern about your bike being safe to ride, or some component that needs to be replaced, or something you're unsure of, lean in on your local bike shop. Your local bike shop is there. They're probably slammed and busy, but they're probably more than happy to help you ride. And one of the things that Mass Bike was able to do through our statewide advocacy was make sure that bike shops were designated as essential services. So even throughout the pandemic shutdown and economic pullback, which is all well and good for society, we were able to recognize bike shops as essential for people to get around as transportation. So bike shops are there for you. And I just recommend that you get to know your local mechanic and get to know your bike shop. But that said, there are certain things that your bike shop probably doesn't want to deal with if you can deal with them yourself. So today is also going to be very much a DIY, do it yourself, and what to check for at home. So here's my bike. I'll go through it in 1 second, but before I do that, let's tell you what tools and supplies we're going to use today. We are going to cover the ABCs, which I call the air, brakes, and chain. There's a little bit more to it, but it's keeping it simple, ABCs. But in order to mess with your air, you're going to need a pump. So this is my floor pump. If you have one that's similarly sized, that's great. A big chamber, lots of air. I have a gauge right here that I really trust. And I'll talk about the nuances of how my pump might be different than your pump. But this is going to be an essential tool to use. And if you don't have a pump at home, if you have a bike, you should have a pump. Ideally, you check your tires once a week. We'll get into it in a second. I know on campus, if you are going to campus, there are places to pump up. There are some buildings that do have pumps, and there are the outdoor bike racks as well, that some of them have outdoor pumps. However, I'm a little wary of the outdoor pumps sometimes because the gaskets that need to have a seal, they are dependent on the weather. So if it's hot or cold or dry or wet, they'll change the rubber gasket size, and it might actually render the pump inoperable. So one caution there is if you're going to use an outdoor pump, just know that you trust it. And if you don't trust it, like, don't use it. And that's why you should have a supplementary pump at home. So get a good size floor pump, and that's going to be tool number one. Tool number two is going to be lubrication for the chain. There's a bunch of different types. This is Sim Lube. You can kind of see it here. It's got different varieties of lubes. We'll cover that shortly, but this is going to be good for your chain in order to be able to clean your chain and make sure that it is gunk-free and rust-free. So that's the second tool. You're going to need some sort of bike-specific lubricant. And along with that, I'll call this as part of the pair of tool number two. You're going to need a rag. A good rag that's ideally, let's say, this is my Boston Bikes one. I always like to go to my bike workshops and my bike breakfasts and grab the extra large size of my t-shirts because it makes better rags and more rags. But whatever rag you're going to use, I like to use cotton t-shirts because it doesn't leave any fibers and it does a good job of soaking up the stuff that we're trying to clean off. So second tool we're going to need is going to be a lubrication and a rag. Those are the two primary tools we're going to be needing today. I have some other secondary tools or supplies. Isopropyl alcohol is really nifty. This will be good for cleaning your brakes and cleaning the rims of your wheels. So if you got rubbing alcohol, awesome. The same stuff you can buy at Walgreens, CVS, anywhere. Costs $5 to get a big bottle like this. This is also a really nice thing to have just for cleaning purposes. And I also have another secondary cleaning device called Green Fizz. This is basically like Simple Green. It's a light solvent. So it's a degreasing agent. I like this because it's bike specific. You can tell by the brand Pedros. This is a bike specific brand. So this is made for bikes. This is mainly for the frame or for any stuff that's really gunky in the gearing system, but this is not a lubricant. So whatever you clean off, if it needs to be greased up, you're going to need to grease it afterwards. I kind of use it as a secondary tool. And what else do I have on here? I have a little bit of WD-40. I'm not really going to get into this too much. I don't like to use WD-40 on my bike, but if there's a seized bolt or a component that's really not moving, this does help by unseizing. But again, not a solvent. It's just not a lubricant. It's just a solvent. So this is also a good secondary tool to have. WD-40 that's used, probably in your garage or your basement now. And then what else do I have on here? And that's kind of about it. I've got some cleaning devices. I've got a brush. I've got a piece of cardboard, anything that you can use. But again, that's all a little bit secondary. What you will need to have just to make sure your bike is ready to roll throughout the season, especially in the springtime, is a pump and a lubricant for the chain and a rag to be able to clean things off. That said, there's tons of more bike supplies you can get, more cleaning supplies. But again, we're keeping this pretty basic at the moment. So that's the supplies we're going to use today. Fairly easy. This is my bike, and I'll talk about it. This is my mountain bike. I like to use this bike as my demo bike because it's pretty simple. It's got all the componentry on the exterior, which means I don't have like internal running cables. These cables here, these are all on the outside, so I can mess with them if I need to. It's got a full gearing system in the rear, which means there's a gear cluster back here to change the gears and a gear cluster in the front to change my gears and have my chain move. So I need to check that. This has hand brakes. So you'll see that I have these levers that operate the brakes. So your bike might be a little different because this is a mountain bike. These gears and the brake levers are basically horizontal. These are type of a handlebar system. So yours might look a little different, but chances are you have a lever activated brake, which means that there's a cable. So that's important to know. And then lastly about this bike is the tires. You'll see that these are actually pretty fat tires. This is my mountain bike again. Your bike might have a different size tire, which will change how much pressure goes in the tire, which is also good to know. We'll cover this in a minute. But that's a little bit about how my bike might be a little bit specific. Similarly to differences of the bikes, this is a mountain bike. So the geometry, not pertinent to today's webinar, but the differences that this bike might have than yours is I'm upright when I'm riding. It's got this flat bar system. The gear changers are actually these grips right here that I can turn to change the gear. You might have a different click system. You might have a different operable system, and it might not even be located on the handlebar. So there are nuances to bikes, but I bet you that your bike has tires that need air. I bet you have a cable pull brake activation. So you can see my brakes on my front wheel move when I pull my brakes. And chances are you have a chain that, similar to this, as it rotates from the front, will spin the rear wheel, and I got the gear cluster back there. Some other nuances of this bike, which are kind of good to just mention just for general purpose. I do have a little saddlebag back here, so I can carry spare rags or a spare tool if I need it and know how to use it. I have a kind of a cheap plastic fender on the back to keep that splash back from giving me what I call the skunk trail, especially important if you're going to be riding into work. I have lights. Obviously, you need lights on your bike. If there's any question about that, hit me up. I know that Harvard provides lights, Mass Bike provides lights. If you don't have lights on your bike, please get in touch. We can at least get you lights to get you safe to a bike shop where you can buy your own. And then a little bit that might be different on your bike. I have shocks on my front, which are basically kind of like a suspension system. So if I'm really hitting a rock or something, I get a little bit of suspension, which I'm not going to mess with today, but it's good to know how your bike functions and how it rolls so that you know what to look for. Pretty basic stuff. We could go into a lot more about the nuances of each of these components, but again, keeping it pretty high level today. Focusing on the A for air, the B for brakes, and the C for chain, but specifically today on how to check it and how to clean it. This is a little bit of an overlap of our ABC check, but specifically geared towards cleaning because, hey, it's springtime, let's make sure that your bike is nice and ready to ride because gosh, today's a gorgeous day to go ride a bike. And hopefully we can get through this webinar and you can find some time today to go riding. Cool. Before I jump right in, Cassidy, anything else that's come up or anything I've missed so far?
Nothing in the group chat in terms of questions. You are kind of going in and out a little, but I think it's a Zoom issue because it looks like you have full connection. So I don't think it's coming from you, but hopefully if anything happens, I'll just kind of butt in and ask you to repeat something.
Perfect. Yeah, and if I go too fast, because I've had about 4 cups of coffee today, slow me down. Totally fine for that. Great. So what we'll do first is the check to overall make sure your bike is ready to roll. And this is similar to the ABC check, what you're going to want to do every single time before you ride. Very basic stuff to make sure that your air brakes and your chain are in good working order. So the first thing I'll do, I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll break it down. So I'll do my ABC check, and then I'll break it. So the first thing I'll do is squeeze my tires and make sure that they have good air. And I know what that feels like. And we'll talk about the squeeze test in a bit. But if I trust it, if I give it a good squeeze, I'm like, okay, good to roll. Check it every time before you ride. You never know when you have a slow leak. You never know when a tube is starting to fail a little bit and you might be a little soft. Not good to ride on soft tires because that's likely to give you a real flat. The next thing I'll check are my brakes. So I'll activate both my brake levers. I'll make sure that there's enough distance between my brake lever and my handlebar. I like to give about 2 fingers, but maybe even more. But make sure that your brakes lock out, and then I'll rock my bike back and forth and make sure that the wheels are locked. No wheels are spinning, and that's good. Again, that my handlebar and my brake lever have a little bit of a gap when fully activated, and that it's doing the job of keeping the wheels from turning. That's the B check. And C, I'm going to kind of pick up my rear wheel just a little bit off the ground and pedal forwards, and to make sure the chain moves smoothly without clicking, and you'll see my rear wheel spin, so I know that the chain is in good and working order. Sometimes the chain can fall off, in which case you can't ride your bike, and I'll cover that in a moment when I get to the C, but that's the very basic. So the ABC check really is just squeeze, squeeze, hold the brakes, rock back and forth, lift up the back, pedal forwards, and if you're in the wrong gear, by pedaling forwards, it'll actually reset the gear systems, then you'll be okay. Very simple. Cool. To break this down. So when you're pulling your bike out for the first time in months, chances are you're going to have a soft tire, if not a completely flat tire. Totally normal. Bikes lose air. Bike tires lose air. The tubes are imperfect. So don't be surprised if that over time you've just got a slightly soft or totally flat tire. That's fine. What you do want to check, though, is the condition of the tire as well. So though we're going to be pumping up these tires as well, before you really even pump up, you want to make sure that the tire is in a condition to be able to hold the air without it blowing out. So what you're going to want to look for are what's called the side wall of the tire, which is essentially kind of the edge of the tire. Look for cracking, look for flaking, look for bulging, which means that the tube under here is kind of trying to poke its way through. And look for what we call threading. It's basically like a cross hatch of threads that hold the tire in place. If your tire is several years old, if it's been in a garage or a basement that's not climate controlled, there might be some dry rot, which again is absolutely normal. And you're going to want to keep an eye on that. If you are to pump up your tire to full capacity on a compromised tire, you run the risk of a blowout. So first thing to look, both sides of both wheels, just kind of run your finger along, see how it feels. Again, checking for bulging, checking for cracking. And if there are cracks, and again, check both sides, give a pretty in-depth look. If it looks like the tire is in bad condition, you need to replace it. Totally fine to replace a tire. I go through about 2 tires a year because I ride every day, even though I'm just a daily commuter. But it's one of those components that more frequently than others, it just needs to be replaced. If you let it go to the point where it starts to fail on you, you're going to get a flat tire, which means you're walking home, or you're going to have to struggle and change it out there in the wild. But if your tire is compromised, I doubt you ride with an extra tire in your bag. So to keep yourself from being stranded, just do the due diligence now before you head out. Secondly, keep an eye on the treading. Now, this is actually a good example of fine treads, but you'll see all of these little knobs here, and you can even kind of see, it's a little hard to see, but there are little hairs on the edge of some of these knobs, which are basically wear indicators. As these treads wear down, the hairs of the treads will wear down as well. Now, this is a mountain bike, so it's fatter tires and it's knobby. It's made for digging into dirt and grass, etc. If you have a road bike with thinner tires that are smoother, you won't have these treads, but you'll have a wear indicator probably somewhere along the tread itself. Sometimes it's two small little half circles that are kind of indented, that are very tiny, about the size of a pinhead, that are actually on the tire itself. And those are wear indicators. Once those pinhead little divots are gone, that means the tire is worn down to the point where it needs to be replaced. So after checking the sidewall, which is the most likely to get dry rotted, check the treading itself and do the same look. Take your finger and run it across, check for bulges, check for any gaps, check for cracks. Small cracks are probably not that big of a deal. However, if there is a piece of debris in there, if there's a piece of a rock or glass or anything that you need to get it out now while you're inspecting your bike, so that when you're riding, it doesn't get more indented and bore itself into the tire. The most, I would say the second most common maybe flat that happens is you get a piece of debris and over time it just wiggles its way through the rubber and into the tube, which is inside of the tire is the tube. And with that, then you get a real flat tire. So check now to make sure that if any rocks, any glass, any debris, get maybe a paper clip or some pen, a ballpoint pen, just kind of dig that out. If you are noticing a crack on the treading though, that is deep enough that you can actually kind of like separate a little bit of the tire or even see the tube underneath it, your tire is shot, it's compromised, it's worn out, it needs to be replaced. Again, any sort of gap in the tire that would allow the tube to inflate enough to poke through and explode, it's going to lead to a blowout, it's going to lead to you walking home. And even more so, if you get a blowout in the front wheel, it could lead to a crash. Not common, but if you do get a blowout in the front, then you lose control of steering. And that's something to be very concerned about. But still, do it now before you head out to give it a good check. So again, run your fingers and just give it a good check over. If your tires are in good condition, next up, what we're going to do is really check the inflation. Very simple with the ABC check where you just squeeze the tire and know how that feels. But every tire is a little different. These tires are wide because they're mountain bike tires, which means that they actually are a little lower pressure on the inside of the tube than maybe a road bike would be. The reason is, obviously for physics, these are wider tires, there's more volume in these tires, so that means there's less pressure. The pressure that is required to make sure you're riding safely depends on the tire, and it's actually etched in or somehow written into the side of your tire. This is a little tricky part because every tire is a little different. Seeing my connection's unstable, make sure I'm back on. Great. Every tire is a little different. So your tire will have a whole bunch of numbers and maybe some words on the side, but what you're looking for is probably a number between 40 and 100, followed by PSI, which this might be very basic for a lot of you, but PSI stands for pounds per square inch. It's the unit of pressure that we generally use for tires, for car tires, for bike tires, for most generally tires that have air in them. PSI, pounds per square inch, and the pressure differential between a low end and a high end should be noted on your tires, and that's what they're rated to. So let's see if I can find my example of this, which is I know I've had a hard time in the past based off of the zoomification of my camera. Let's see if I can find it. It's a little hard to see. Let's see if I can find it. It's actually written right. You know, I might have another example of it, but it's very hard to see. It's about 5 spokes up from that reflector. It says between 35 and 80 PSI. I'm sorry that didn't come through, but let me see if I can demonstrate that with this image here. Maybe this will come through a little bit better. You can kind of see, well, it's a little hard to see too, but it says here, inflate to 40 to 60 PSI. which is, again, a little hard to see. My apologies if that didn't come through. But look on your tire, and you're going to have two tires, and they might be different. My bike has two different tires. You can see that one's kind of got a white sidewall and one's all black. So that means they're rated differently. I'm going to need to check both. What is the rating of the pressure of the tires? Now, I go through this to say that there's a lower end and a higher end, typically for tires. Sometimes you only have the higher end, especially on a road bike. It'll say something along the lines of 100 PSI or 110 PSI, which is actually a very high pressure. The reason they give you the upper end is because most people do go generally to the upper end. I would be safe to say that if you don't want to ride as hard or as fast on a full pressure tire, you can probably drop that about 10 PSI. So if it says rated to or inflate to 100 PSI, you're probably just as fine as 90 PSI. And that would provide you a little bit more comfort. There's a little bit more squish to the tire, which actually acts as a shock absorber. So you don't feel every rock and you don't feel every crack. However, it slows you down to have a slightly softer tire because the tire will squish a little bit more. It'll splay out a little bit more, which provides more friction of the tire on the tarmac, on the pavement. So it'll slow you down just based off friction, physics. So a higher pressure tire means that you can go faster because there's less friction, but it also means you're going to feel more of the bumps and you don't get that squish and that softness. If you go 10 PSI below the top, maybe 15 if you want, that's probably fine. But if you are below a recommended inflation pressure, what can also happen is your tire can squish so much that the tire itself squeezes and the tube inside will pinch against the rim, the metal rim of the wheel. The tube will pinch against the rim and you're going to get what's called a pinch flat. A pinch flat is basically two little holes that are squeezed into on a tube, and it gives you a full flat tire. Basically, it gives two little holes in the tube. This, I would argue, is the most common flat that we see out in the wild, out in a bike shop. And I spent 5 years at a bike shop before this, so we saw plenty of flat tire. Mostly, it's done by underinflating your tires, riding around, going off a curb, hitting a pothole, and that squish of the tire squeezes the tube against the sharpness of the rim inside, and you get a pinch flat. Pinch flat, you can tell because if you ever pull the tube out and separate out the tube and tire system, if it looks like there's two little holes near each other, we call it a snake bite flat as well, like two little snake fangs. That's basically because you got a pinch flat. And the reason for that flat is very important to know. It's just user error. Chances are you didn't inflate it to the proper inflation pressure, and the tire didn't have the structural capacity to keep that tube structurally sound. You got the squish, you got the pinch flat. So know what the recommended inflation is and stay within that. If you go below the inflation pressure, you're likely to get a pinch flat. You're also going to ride slower. It's going to be a little bit squishier. It's also really important, as a side note, if you're ever commuting to work, if you're ever commuting to work and you're like, man, I really want to shave 5 minutes off my ride, I bet you can do it just by pumping up your tires. If you go above the inflation pressure, so again, this is rated to 80 PSI at the maximum. If I go above that, I run the risk of blowing off my tire based off pressure, and then I got to blow out, and then I'm walking again. So you want to know what that range is on your specific bike, and you can tell by looking at the edge of the tire itself and trying to find on there what the PSI is. If you're unfamiliar with it and you can't find it, bring it to a bike shop. They can probably tell you pretty easily, or be in touch with me. We can throw our emails in the chat, no question about it. We can help you out. But frame of reference, most bikes that are mountain bikes like this start at around 30 PSI and go up to around 60. Hybrid bikes, which we are like a mix between a mountain bike and a road bike, have slightly narrower tires, a higher pressure, typically around 60 to 80 PSI. Just rule of thumb here. And a road bike with really thin tires, because they're made for going fast, they're typically around 80 to 100 to 110 PSI. There's a pretty big range, even though we're only talking about a difference between like an inch or so width differential between the types of tires. Just as a frame of reference, For those of you who drive automobiles, car tires also use the same PSI pressure standard. Car tires are about 30 PSI or like 28 PSI. So even though car tires are weighted to have, you know, all the tons of a car and all the pressure of going fast on a highway, they're lower pressure mainly because their volume is so much more than a bike tire. So just a little frame of reference. And another little side note, the cool thing about bike and cars is that, what I'll get into now, how you pump up a bike tire, it's the same valve as pumping up a car tire for the most part, if you have the same Schrader valve, and I'll talk about that in a second. So you can use a bike pump to top off your car tire if you want to. It's just going to take a lot of pumps, but it's the same exact system. So if you're familiar with filling a car tire, it's the same tube and tire system. So you got some know-how already. For those of you who this is new to, this is probably the most essential thing to learn. For those of you who already do this, great. My rule is, again, the squeeze test with ABC, but I also put in air maybe at least once a week if I'm riding every day. I'll probably put in about 10 PSI, which is about 3 or 4 pumps worth on my floor pump to make sure that I'm in the range of which I like to ride at. And I can change based off preference. Do I want to be in the higher end or the lower end? And I can even change it day by day. I could let some air out or add some air if I'm going to be running late to work. It's worth taking the 90 seconds to put more air in because I guarantee you'll make it up on the roads. Or if I'm going out for a cruise and just going to be squishing around a little bit, I'm okay a little bit of a lower pressure. But again, going too low, likely to get pinch flat. And if you go too high, you're likely to blow it off. So you need to know what your tire is. In order to check what your pressure is at, there's a system of the squeeze test, which I've been talking about, just knowing it based off how much squish is in your tire. But if you're not familiar with what it's supposed to feel like, you're going to need to know, where did I put my pump? Here it is. You're going to need to know what each PSI is by basically doing a test. So one thing I'm going to ask you to do is to get familiar with what each level of PSI feels like with each squish, and maybe start really soft at like a 10 or 20 PSI, which you can't ride on, but know what that feels like as a squish. And then as you pump up, get familiar with the squeeze. And so you just get that muscle memory down. This is probably one of the most essential things to learn. So that said, I know what my pressure rating is. I know my tire's in good condition, and I've got my floor pump. Now I'm going to go and actually put the pump on the tube, and I will, I'll actually demonstrate on my bike here, and we'll actually go check the tire. So there are 2 different valves that you're going to need to know about on how to pump up your tube. There's 2 different types of valves that different bikes have. There is the wider valve, which is called a Schrader. Let me see if I can find this for us. Right here. This is a Schrader valve system. And you can see that this is similar to a car. It's wider, it's fatter, and you can see it pokes through on the rim. This is how I would just put a pump head on the valve here and be able to activate it. And similarly to a car, there's nothing really else to worry about. Just put the pump head on. The other style of valve is called Presta, and I'll demonstrate. And I actually have 2 wheels for this purpose. Typically, your bike will have one or the other, but on this one as my demo, I have both. But you'll see down here that this is, let me see if I can get this in a better background. This is a narrower and thinner valve system. And the difference between the Presta valve and the Schrader is that there's a little knob on here that we'll actually need to unscrew. I'm going to take a small break here, Cassidy. My apologies. Give me 10 seconds to go grab some spare tubes because I'm realizing my light is not going to be appropriate for us seeing this. So I'm going to leave here for just 10 seconds, grab a tube, and I'll come right back. I'm sorry for not having this ready, but my apologies real quick. Great.
And I did share this in the group chat, but I do have the pamphlet of the Landry's bike care information that includes PSI and other ABC checks. So after this workshop, I'll email it out to everybody.
Thanks, Cassidy. Great. All right, so that's like, so the 2 different valve systems, just so you're familiar, the Presta has, well, there's a dust cover I can unscrew, and there's a ring that I can get out of the way, but this is a little bit secondary. but you'll see what it has on here is a brass tip that needs to be unscrewed in order to access the valve. And now I can put my pump head on and fill it up. And then when I'm done, I want to screw this brass tip down and boom, ready to roll. On a pump that's got the fatter Schrader, you'll see it says even Schrader at the top. The valve here, it's got the wider system. I'm just going to break open this box and show you here what the Schrader valve looks like. And again, I'm sorry if this is common knowledge for everybody, but this is super important to know. The way that the Schrader valve systems work is, I'll get the dust cap off. You'll see that it's much wider. It doesn't have a little brass tip like the Presta does, and it even has a little plunger on the inside that gets depressed. So the way that this works is this is how it'll interface with the pump head. Now, you have a pump. You've got a pump head. You need to know how your pump head interfaces with each style of valve. So on this pump head, you'll see that I actually have two different holes. I have a wider hole up top for Schrader and a skinnier hole on the bottom for Presta. This is key. Your pump will be different than my pump. Some pumps only have one hole, which means that they're made for both. They're universal. That's great. Other pumps have a pump head on one side and another one on another side so that you know which one is which. And it'll probably change how you have a lock, which is this lock right here. But you need to know which hole for which style of valve. As you can see, as I put the Schrader, if I were to put my pump head on it on the smaller end, and the bottom one, it just won't fit. It won't go on. So I'll need to know that it goes on the fatter one. And then on this particular pump head, I open it up to lock it into place. And then you'll see as I inflate that I actually get some air into the pump, from the pump into the tube. And now my tube has a little bit of shape to it. I've got my circular tube, and this is what's inside of the tire. This is the Schrader. On the Presta, again, if I haven't unscrewed this, I'm not going to be able to put air into my tire, which is a little bit of a concern. So if I were to demonstrate just the same, and I put my pump head and I put it on the Presta without unscrewing it and opening it up, what happens is, even though I've locked it open, I can't push the air down on my pump. Or if I did and forced it, what happens is the air doesn't go anywhere after it goes into this hose. And so my pressure, you can see my pressure on this is all the way up to 50 PSI, which is kind of ridiculous because I only did half of a pump. So what you'll notice is on your pump, if you're only getting one or two really hard struggles of a pump and you're not actually inflating your tire, chances are there's some problem with the interface of the valve to the pump head, and you got to figure it out. Sometimes it's a Presta and you have to unscrew it and you're like, oh, I forgot to do that. That's fine. Or sometimes the pump head has a misalignment and it doesn't actually seal. And so you'll get one or two pumps in, the PSI will jump to 60 or 100 or more. And you say, oh, well, got to pull the pump head off, got to put it back on. So know which valve system for which tire. That's absolutely crucial. So in the interest of just running through it, because again, this is just the basics, I will demonstrate on my front tire how to pump it up. I'll find my valve. Probably, some people like to put it on the ground, some people like to put it up here. It doesn't really matter where, it's as long as it's a little bit out of the way. Put my pump head on, open it up, do about one solid pump, because what that'll do is it'll normalize the air from the chamber into the hose, and so the gauge will be reading properly. And right now, my gauge reads about 50 PSI, which means that my tire is right within the range, because my range is between 35 and 80. I'm right in the middle there, so I know what that feels like. I've got that squeeze. Excellent. Actually feels pretty hard. Not rock hard. There's a little bit of squish, but I know now, based off muscle memory, what 50 PSI feels like. So I do a couple of pumps. 3 pumps gets me to 60. Let's go up to 70. And give that a squeeze. Oh, that actually feels pretty rock hard. So even though I'm 10 PSI above the maximum, it's still pretty hard. I'm probably totally okay on that. Again, whatever your comfort level is between the range that it needs to be at. But if you don't know from muscle memory and practice, then you won't have an adequate squeeze test. And the goal here is to make sure you can do this on the fly, pulling the bike out, check it out, give it a squeeze, ready to roll. And then maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, applying the nozzle of the pump, putting it on there, checking it, and make sure everything is looking good. So that's more or less for the A. Again, it's the condition of the tire. Check it by feeling it. And the sidewall and the treading of both tires. Check to know what the PSI rating is on your tire. It'll be written on the side of the tire. And then know what that feels like with the squeeze test based off your pump system and knowing which pump valve you are going to need. And I should have mentioned that the difference between Presta and Schrader depends a lot on the width of the wheel. The fatter Presta valves go in wider tires. The narrower Presta ones, the fatter Schrader ones go in fatter tires, like mountain bike ones. And the narrower Presta ones are made for road bikes. So if you got a road bike, chances are you're rocking Presta. If you got a fatter hybrid or cruiser, beach cruiser, mountain bike like I do, you'll be in the Schrader category. So that was real quick and easy. And I wish I were in person with you, because I would actually go to different PSIs and have you squeeze my bike as it goes around to feel the difference. But with that, real quick, any questions about the A so far?
Hi, Galen. Yes, we do have one question in the chat. And for novice riders, anyone who might be feeling overwhelmed by all of the information that is going on in this workshop, what is one maintenance thing that you can absolutely not ignore? And I don't know if this was just regarding air or for ABCs in general.
It would be the ABCs, because if you don't have air, you can't ride. And so you need to know how to pump up your tires. For brakes, if your brakes aren't working well, you can't stop sharply, it becomes a danger. And I'll cover that in 1 second just to check your brakes. That's something that's absolutely crucial too. And the C for the chain, if the chain's not functional or it's really rusted or gunky and you can't actually get some momentum going forward, you can't ride. So all of these are absolutely crucial of the A, the B, and the C. I know I'm diving deep into each of those, even though it's still pretty surface level, but that's why this is the collective. I will say though that your tires will need more attention regularly. Like I say, once or twice a week, check them. If I ride every day, or if it's been a while, you'll need to pump up before you ride. And I check my brakes just simply by squeezing them. And I'll demonstrate in a second how I can do a quick on the fly check. And then I clean my chain about maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks or so. So, it is something though that you want to check every time before you ride to know that all three of those systems are functional. Cool.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So back to the B, and again, a little bit of an overlap of what we did with the ABC check, but I'll go into a little bit more detail of how to clean. I didn't talk a lot about cleaning the tires, by the way. It's mostly about picking out debris, but for the brakes, as we talk about, there is a lot that we can talk about in terms of cleaning. So the first thing I will recommend to check is when you squeeze the brake lever, like I'm doing here, make sure that doesn't go all the way to the handlebar. That's the first thing, so you can get some good leverage and stop. Second thing is that as you are braking, and you can see on my front wheel, that it actually will activate when I'm squeezing my brakes, that you watch the brake itself maneuver, and that there's not a lot of gunk or grit or grime in the way. And then thirdly, what we're going to check is the condition of the brake pads, and I'll show you how you can modify the tightness and the security of your brakes. So the way the brakes work on this bike, it's a cable activated. So when I pull this lever, it yanks a little cable down here, cantilever brake, and you'll see that it pulls in and my brake pads are engaged, and just put a little bit of rubber on the metal rim. That's all that's needed to stop a bike. However, over time, the brake pads do wear out, they do get a little dry, and they do get a little cracked. So a good way to keep an eye on them is to clean them and to just observe how they wear. And when they do start to wear, you replace them. You can't rebuild a brake pad. So one thing about cleaning your bike is to make sure that the debris is off so that you're not wearing down your brake pads prematurely, and that you're keeping an eye on them so that when they do wear down, just like when the tire wears down, you replace it. To check your brakes, I'll go through two different spots here that the way they work. The first thing we'll do is we'll actually disengage my brake, which is probably not the same on your bike, but it will afford me the ability to show you what I'm about to do. So on this bike, which is a little particular, I can actually unhook this brake cable on the front, and I can yank it out, and now my brake is open. And you can see that my brake pad being open means that it's not activating. So when I hit my brake pad, my brake lever, it's not actually hitting this brake arm. So I'm not going to be able to stop, by the way. But what it does allow me to do is give me a little bit of a gap so I can take a look at the brake pad itself. And you can see that I've given my space between the brake pad and the rim, which would allow me to clean off the pad and clean off the rim. Your bike might have a little lever by the brake itself, in which case you can open up your brake and make it a little bit wider. Just giving yourself an inch or half an inch will afford you the ability to get in there with a rag and really wipe it down. The only thing that I would recommend for cleaning a brake, well, if you wanted to, you could just use a rag, but the only liquid or solvent that I would recommend is isopropyl alcohol. So this is, again, though it's secondary, it's a nifty little tool to have in the toolkit, because what isopropyl alcohol does is it evaporates. It doesn't leave a residue. You don't want something like Simple Green for your brakes or your rims, because this does leave a little bit of a film. However, isopropyl alcohol, 60 proof, 90 proof, whatever, it evaporates and only leaves itself. It's basically just water and alcohol. So this does a really good job about cleaning the rim and cleaning the brake. And the way that I apply this, and I'll use this rag here, I'll just take a little bit of rubbing alcohol, put it on my rags, and what I'll do is I'll wipe down my rims, because that's where the rubber of the brake pad will hit. And let's see, I've used this bike on so many demos, it's actually not too grimy. But you can actually, it's a little hard to see, but you can start to see a little bit of the grit that starts to come off. Maybe I'll do it on my rear wheel, because usually I do my front wheel. And you can kind of rub it in, and you'll see the blackness that starts to come off. That's grit, that's metal, that's shards of grime and metal that you're riding through. And if you leave it on your rim, every time you brake, it starts to wear into your pads, and your pads will start to wear out. So a good thing to be able to do is to wipe your rim and wipe your pads, but again, only with something like alcohol. Actually not something like, actually just alcohol. And similarly, because I've had a little bit of a gap between my brake pad, I can actually rub my brake pad a little bit, which not a problem. It even kind of roughs up the metal a little bit. And as I'm here, I'm actually able to look and see and inspect and see if there's any little bits of flakes of metal that I could also pick out of the rubber. If you take this to another level, you can also get a piece of sandpaper and rough up the rubber of the brake pad if you're able to access the brake pad without misaligning it. But what you're going to want to look for is just a little bit of roughing up, because a little bit more friction will help out of the stopping power of your brake pad. If your brake pad is so worn down that you have basically a smooth or even a little bits of metal of the brake itself that are through the pad, you need to get them replaced. Brake pads do wear out. I go through maybe a brake pad every season, so it's not like it's all the time, but they're fairly cheap to get replaced. And if you don't replace them, you can't stop. So the cleaning your bike aspect of this is, again, just a rag. You can wipe it down. If you wanted to add some alcohol to that rag, go ahead and do that. And that'll act as a good solvent. And then you can also clean off the pad and rough it up. Some of you might have disc brakes. And disc brakes are actually the brake stopping power in the middle of the wheel by the hub. Imagine like a rotor. That's what motorcycles have as well. It's a little bit of a different system. I don't want to get too much into it, but the same principles apply. You won't be able to open it up and get at a big metal brake pad, like a big rubber brake pad like I can here. But the same idea of using isopropyl alcohol and wiping down the rotor will afford you the same benefit of getting that grit and grime off. And if you've got any residue, or if you've got a little bit of oil on there, the alcohol will help clean that off, and that will increase your stopping power, and you will stop quicker. So that's the first tool to recommend there, is to kind of get into it, wipe it down with some rubbing alcohol and make sure you're good. Now, because I've opened up my brake, I need to close my brake. Never forget that the final step always is to check the ABCs, but in the process, I'm going to take my cable and put it back on. And again, only because I know how to do this, I'm comfortable doing this. I recommend bringing your bike to a bike shop or somebody who's in the know, and you can like triple check to make sure you put your brake back on proper. So brake's in good condition, it's clean. clean, it's stopping power, and I can tighten, I can squeeze it down. And I know that the brake pad is in good condition and the rim is in good condition. And if not, wipe it down, just wipe it down. The next thing about the brakes, which is kind of the last thing about the brakes too, is how tight is the cable. You can probably modify with something called the barrel adjusters. These little knurled, and the word knurled means like rigid, essentially. These spiral knurls actually can control how tight, loose my cable is by about an inch by either unscrewing or screwing these in. So on my bike, because I have a brake system like this, along the cable, I found these little knurls. And what can happen is, as my brakes wear out, because the cable will stretch a little bit or the pad will wear, there's a little bit more of a gap between the brake and the rim, I need to tighten my brakes. So what I'll do is take my barrel adjuster, and again, on my bike it's here, on your bike it might be on the brake itself, but I guarantee if you have a cable pull system that's modern, and it's along the cable line somewhere, you'll have a little barrel that you can spin. Unscrewing this is a little weird because it's not intuitive. Unscrewing this, by that I mean it pulls the barrel away from the brake. It actually tightens up the cable. And what this does is it actually lengthens the housing, the space that the cable has to travel. It kind of spaces it out and kind of pulls the cable a little bit more taut so that my brakes are closer to the rim, and therefore my brake lever activated is tighter. And see if I can get this in the camera here. I know it's a little tricky based off the sun coming through. But you'll see that on this pad, on this lever, the cable will actually flow through the lever, through the housing. And I have a lock ring, which is the black part, and the barrel itself, which is silver. I'm going to move the barrel. I'm going to actually scoot it in by moving the lock. And then what I'll do is you watch as I kind of like screw it in a little bit. And it's kind of going into the lever. It's a little hard to see off the Zoom camera, my apologies. But the way I can tell if it worked is now if I activate the lever, I can pull my brake lever that much closer in. And you can see that my distance now, it can't even fit 2 fingers. It's actually pretty close from the lever to the handlebar. But if I unscrew, no tools needed, even just a couple of turns, now when I activate my brakes, it locks out with a good amount of gap in between. I can probably fit 2 or 3 fingers between my brake lever and my handlebars. The thing that you need to know is what is the comfort level for both your front and back brakes so that you can stop at an emergency stop, and you can modify the cable tautness, minorly, but enough that it can make a big difference whether it's safe enough to ride. And you can modify your own brake strength tightening based off the barrel adjuster. I did not use a tool, but it's absolutely key for you to know that if you screw it in, slightly looser brakes, or if I unscrew it, slightly tighter brakes. With brakes, it is a personal preference, but you got to make sure you can stop. If you can't stop, you can't ride safely. So test it and get familiar with your barrel adjusters. As the cleaning aspect of things go, you're also going to want to make sure that there's a good amount of travel and it doesn't feel too gritty and too grimy. So for those of you who want to go one extra level, and I'll leave the brakes at this, just knowing that I want to wrap up with chain in a second. The chain lube that we're about to use in a second can also be applied in small doses to the brake cables if your cables are having a sticky time. So they're really rusty on the inside or they feel really grimy. You can actually get a little bit of cable juice. It's just like in the braking system, you can drop a drop or 2 within the barrel adjuster to make its way into the cable system. And you can have just a couple of drops of lubricant. If they make their way into the cables, then you'll be a smooth breaker. And that's something that's super important. And if you have any questions about that, a bike shop will be able to help you out. So again, about the brakes, it's about the gunk and the debris on the rim and on the brake pad and cleaning those off with rubbing alcohol. And if you have a cable pull system, you have the barrel adjusters probably somewhere along the cable that you can modify. And again, if you have disc brakes, if they're cable pull disc brakes, you probably have a barrel adjuster somewhere, either by the handlebars or by the brake itself. But clean it off with rubbing alcohol and only rubbing alcohol. Don't use a solvent, and try not to get any of the grease, like this lubricant, on the brake pad or on the rim. And if you do, use rubbing alcohol to clean it off. Right before I jump into C, Cassidy, is there anything to bring up before I round out with the chain?
We just got one really quick question, and they apologize if they missed it, but disc brakes, do you wipe those down with alcohol as well?
Yes, the rotor itself, just with rubbing alcohol. Again, if it's a brake or a wheel rim oriented, rubbing alcohol is the way to go. If it's at all involved the brakes, you want to make sure that rubbing alcohol is your go-to. So again, you might not even need it. You could probably just wipe it down with a rag or even some water. But knowing that if you use a solvent like Simple Green, it's going to leave a film which could prevent you from getting good friction.
Got it. Thank you. And we're coming down to a 5-minute warning, so I just want to let you know that we're rounding out the time.
Excellent. I appreciate everyone sticking with us. So the last thing we'll talk about is the chain, and this is kind of a little bit more of the cleaning off the gunk aspect of things. So the thing about a chain is that it will collect everything you ride through. You can imagine these small metal pieces and all of the gears, tens of thousands of rotations that are going on when you're pedaling. All the stuff that gets collected that you ride through kind of gets gunked up and travels through the chain and gets caught up in the gearing system. So for cleaning purposes, what I really recommend is, well, twofold. One, you're going to want to clean and lubricate the chain, which I'll get into about 90 seconds. But one thing to also pay attention to is the gunk that collects in the cassette, in the gear cluster here. So for that, I recommend a little bit of Simple Green, which is my solvent, but also something to get at the gearing system. What I really like to use is a piece of cardboard. And cardboard is super easy to get in between the gears back here, if you have a gear cluster. And I can actually kind of carve through. And I want to use something that's soft, that's malleable, and I can actually kind of dig through and get a lot of grit off. And you can see all the grit that starts to come off. Again, this is not the best bike because it's actually gone through a couple of these demos, but I guarantee you when I ride in the woods and I come back, having a little piece of cardboard, I can just kind of carve through and get that gunk off. Secondly, with my rag and maybe a little bit of solvent, I'm going to want to get at my derailleur system. And you'll see down here, I have my arms that are really gunky. And what I'll do is as I'm wiping down my chain, I'll also kind of wipe through the pulley wheels and the flywheels, and you'll see the grit that starts to come off. A lot of biking problems when you're shifting or pedaling is just gunk in the chain and gunk in the derailleur because it collects. So doing your due diligence to kind of wipe it down. And again, you can use a solvent like Simple Green. And I also recommend this for the frame, something very easy. And just kind of like spritz. See if I can just do a little quick little spritzy demonstration of just like spraying down the frame, maybe spraying the derailleur a little bit, and then making sure that I wipe it down. This is very simple stuff, but it's good to do regularly because if you let things collect, they will start to fall apart. So once you feel like you've got enough debris off of it, the thing that you also keep in mind with the chain is it has to be lubricated. So the way that you clean a chain, it's a 4-step process, very basic. It's a wipe it down, and then you apply the lubrication, and you let it sit, and then you wipe it down again. Again, it's a wipe it, lube it up, let it wait, and then wipe it down again. I'll demonstrate real quick, and then I'll go through the process of a little bit more broken down of why it's important. So the first step, again, is to just kind of wipe the chain down. I equate this to like brushing your teeth before going to the dentist, for instance. You want to get that gunk off before you lubricate it because it'll do a better job. So what I'll do is I will kind of wipe my chain. I can kind of hold my pedal so my chain stays taut, and I can rub the top part of it, and you'll see a lot of the gunk that starts to come off. And that's metal and grit that I want to remove. So I'm going to want to clean that off. And again, if I've done my due diligence of cleaning through my gears, the chain will have more fine particulate. So this is just kind of a cursory wipe, and I'll kind of run my chain a little bit. And if your chain ever starts to fall off, you can kind of just pedal forward and do your due diligence of wiping the tops and the sides of the chain. Next, what you're going to want to do is apply the lubrication. I recommend getting a bike-specific lubricant. So I have a few for you. This is called Enduro. Again, it's a Pedro's brand. It's a pretty thin lube. It looks kind of like olive oil. I could get something that actually has a wax base. You can see the wax in there. I can kind of shake it up. This is a thicker lubricant. And this is really good for riding in the winter time because it lasts a little longer. You can use something called Sin Lube. This is a Pedro's brand as well. This is a little bit thicker, a little more viscous. The change of lubrication depends on your conditions. If you're riding in the wet, you want to make sure that you're getting something a little bit thicker. But the way that you apply it, and I actually might, just for the interest, I'll do it standing up. The idea of applying lubrication is you want to make sure that you get it link by link. So I find a place where I can pedal backwards freely, which I can do right here. And what I'll do is I'll take my lubricant and I will literally just go one drop at a time. Boop, 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 just literally one little drop at a time. And the goal is to make sure that the lubrication gets to the point. Let me show you my chain model. This is my chain model. You want to make sure that the chain lubrication gets at the point where the links meet. So it'll soak through and get at the interior of the chain, because this is where all the moving pieces are. My metal model is a blown up scale version of a chain. And to show you what's moving in a chain is these rollers on the interior. There are these pins that are on the inside. And inside of the chain, if I were to deconstruct it, you'll have these rollers, and these collect a lot of grit. And that's what you need to flush out of a chain. So when you're cleaning a chain, it's actually very effective because you can kind of get the lubrication to flush through the chain and clean it off. So you don't actually really need a solvent. You really just need a lubricant that'll get through the chain. But you put a drop in where the links meet, and you want to make sure you get every single link. For those of you who are type A people, which is great, you can do drop by drop by drop. For those of you who are type B people like myself, a small little stream and just pedal backwards to make sure that you're getting it throughout the whole chain. That's the second step. The third step is to let it sit, give it a few minutes, 15 minutes maybe. Some people wait overnight, let it soak through. Maybe you let it do a ride. And the goal is to get the lubrication to get through the chain. And the last step is after you've lubed it up, you'll wipe it down again, because any of the gunk that you're wiping off, any of the grease that you're wiping off the chain is excess. You only need to get a lube interior of the chain. So anything on the exterior just makes the chain gunky and wet, which could actually detract from the cleaning it off. So the last step of wiping it down is probably one of the most important steps. Again, wipe it down, apply the lubricant, link by link, let it sit, and then you wipe it down again. And I do this maybe once every 6 weeks or so, or if it ever starts to get rusty, it ever starts to sound like a squeaky wheel, then just go ahead and do it. And if you've got a little rust on your chain, chances are you're totally fine. Put some lube on it, it'll probably come back to life. And if you're having trouble shifting, chances are it's because your chain doesn't have the fluidity of motion that needs. So lubrication typically will solve most of those problems too. But that's kind of the be all end all of keeping a chain nice and clean. And if there's any major problems, like you're noticing some skipping forwards or there's a break in the chain length, then go to a bike shop and get the chain replaced, because chains do need to be replaced. But if you let your chain get gunky, if you let your chain get rusty, and especially the gear cluster, you're not going to have an efficient time when you're pedaling, and you're not going to shift properly. And the last thing before I leave you and send you right back to Cassidy, I know I'm a couple minutes over, so my apologies here. I like to have one final tip of having a watering can handy is really nifty. So the last thing I'll do when I clean my bike, if I'm really getting at it, especially if I'm riding in the sand or the salt, is I'll literally just kind of water my bike and just kind of pour water on my bike. And if I'm inside, I'll put a bucket or a piece of cardboard under it to catch it, or do it outside. But the reason I use a watering can and not a hose is because there's no pressure involved with this. Some warm water and just pour it where I know that there's dirt or mud, and then I just wipe it down. Bikes are meant to be outdoor creatures. They're meant to be out in the rain. It's totally fine to get wet, but the pieces of the chain that need to be lubricated, the pieces of the derailleur that need to be degunkified, the pieces of the rim and the brake that need to be regularly checked out to make sure that they're not full of debris. And then on top of that, literally just a little bit of a watering can. And if it's a muddy day, I might, before I bring it inside, I might pour a little bit of water outside, but I don't use a hose, because a hose could actually put force enough to get the grit inside of the bike, which then is nearly impossible to get out, and it could cause rust. So again, something very simple, something very gentle. So this is very, very basic. And then just to recap, once you feel like you've done it, do the ABC check regularly, to make sure that you're doing everything proper. Know the pressure that you want your tires to be at. Know that your brakes are in good condition and that they're locking out, and that if you've ever detached your brakes, you're reattaching them, and that your clean and lubricated chain still flows by picking up the back just ever a little bit and flowing through. So that's a lot. I know that's a lot. So thank you for sticking with me. I'm happy to take a break and answer any further questions that folks might have. And I'm happy to stick around knowing we're like 5 or 6 minutes over. So thanks for extending your lunch break with me.
Thanks, Galen. Before we go into questions, I know since we're over, I just want to thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us on this topic. And thank you for everyone who joined in with us today and who participated in the chat. If you do have any additional questions for us or Galen, you may stay on the Zoom call and unmute your mic. With that being said, I do have one 2-part question in the chat regarding the chain. If there's a little bit of rust on the chain, should you get rid of the rust before applying lube? And the second part of the question is there a household replacement for lubrication if you don't have it on hand, such as a sewing machine oil?
Ooh, good question. Second part, I'm unsure about, although I will say that I have at some time in my life used olive oil when I really needed it. When I was out on a bike ride, I was on like a long tour and my chain was going to fall apart. So I used olive oil, but then I run the risk of it getting kind of rancid. So I would recommend sticking with bike specific stuff. However, I know sewing machine oil is really thin. Don't use motor oil. Don't use anything that's made for combustion engine or anything for larger pieces. Keep in mind that though my bike model has a pretty large chain, these pieces of metal are really fine. We're talking millimeters make a difference as to the wear and tear on these things. So you want to make sure that anything that is lubrication also is able to flow through the chain and doesn't get caught in it and get gunked up. So I don't know of a shorthand. I bet you if I did some Googling and some forums, I could probably talk to some DIY bikers and see what's worked for them. But my real recommendation is to stick to stuff that's made for bikes. And even something like WD-40, though they make bike lubricant, most 40, as you know it, is a solvent. So this will get rid of rust, but if you only get rid of the rust inside of a chain like this, what happens is the gap inside where the links meet and the rollers and the pin are, if that is left open to fill with air and moisture, it's just going to bring more rust. So having a good bike specific lubricant act as a flushing agent, and then in that gap, in that space, it's filled with lubrication. So that's why I recommend sticking with a bike, because it's chemically made for that. And then for the first question, if there's a little bit of rust on the chain, I bet you just by lubrication, it'll work itself out. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you take like a steel wool or anything to it. Don't worry about it. If it's not shifting gears properly, or if the kink in the chain isn't able to get worked out, and sometimes the chain will lock up and it won't be able to flex. If it doesn't flex, put the lubrication on it, let it sit overnight, try to force it, try to wake it up. And if it actually doesn't wake up, even with a good amount of lubrication, you might need a new chain if it's that rusted. But a little bit of rust, as long as the chain flows and bends, that's probably totally fine.
Thanks, Galen. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and or show Galen your bike. I see that there's some people on camera.
Yeah.
Galen's mentioned that he has a few extra minutes that he can hang on.
I don't have any questions, but I am a sewer, and I do know that it is a machine oil and it should work fine. Although I do use regular bike lubricant on my bike and use my sewing machine oil on my sewing machine.
Good to know. Cool. I hope that helps. And feel free to chime in with a particular piece of knowledge to share or anything that, yeah, please chime in.
Is there anything that I need to know if I have an internal hub shifter?
Ooh,
shifter.
Very good question. Not really, actually, from your perspective. So actually, I take that back. Depending on the type of hub, and what she's referring to is the gear cluster back here. Sometimes that's inside of the center of the wheel, which is totally encased, and you can't really get at it like I was with my cardboard. you might have a small hole in the hub itself, which might have a little cap on it. And you can pull that cap off and you could pour oil into the hub. I know that's how the old Stormy Archers used to work. And the old Stormy Archers were basically like the English 3-speed style, and you would get like a special oil, but I think any chain grease would work too. But there might be a hole to get inside of the hub just by pouring it in. Yep. So look for that. Look for that little hole in the hub, and you might need a funnel of sorts to get it in there. I know they make them bike specific because everything's very specific on a bike. But that's the only thing that I would recommend that you would want to do at home, is just like make sure that every so often, maybe once a season even, you're filling that hub itself internally with oil, and that'll just keep things nice and lubricated on the inside. Secondarily, there's probably a cable system that goes from the outside, so you can keep an eye on the cabling. If the cable starts to look like it's really rusty or it's not able to flow properly, you might be able to get a couple of drops of lubricant in the cable system to make it flow better. But besides that, like, there's not really much maintenance that's needed on those internal hubs, which is kind of the beauty of them, frankly.
All right, so
But I will also say that everything's, sorry, Cassie, didn't cut you off, but everything's a little bit specific. So you can also Google that specific hub. If it's a Stormy Archer 3-speed from whenever, you can say, you know, how to keep in good condition. Every piece of a bike is a little bit different than another. So same principles of trying to keep things lubricated in the hub and gear changing system, just a different way of getting at it.
awesome. So it doesn't look like there's any additional questions. I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. So if anything does pop up after the fact, feel free to email us. We can help you find resources or answers to your questions. And thanks again, Galen, for spending the time with us. And thank you everyone for staying after and asking questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We got everyone to stay a little bit longer, so that's really nice. I'll throw my email in, and you can also go to massbike.org to check out all the great work we're doing on the advocacy front as well. And stay in touch with Cassidy and Ben and all the rest from Commuter Choice, because we got a lot of stuff coming up this season.
Of course. And hopefully we see you during our next session in May about new bike infrastructure. So see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.
Bye.
Great. Thanks.
I'm just